Welcome back to the second episode in our two-part series about Reading, Pennsylvania, and the work school and community leaders undertook together with the Harwood Institute. This is your host, Ken Feudernick. In case you haven't listened to the first episode, let me just share one of the most valuable takeaways for me. What leaders said repeatedly about their work with the Harwood Institute that differed from how they used to operate was learning how to turn outward. Doing that meant they had to listen. Really listen to their constituents about what they truly wanted and needed. It also meant leaders had to get out of their silos and begin collaborating with one another. In this episode, you will hear about what happened when people actually began turning outward. They catalyzed three critically important initiatives that got off the ground, spread, and unleashed several promising ripple effects. All of that began to have a significant impact on youth and their families in Reading. Importantly, you'll also hear about how this work ultimately transformed Reading's civic culture, breaking down silos and fragmentation to get leaders and groups working together in a new, important, promising ways. I want to remind listeners that you can download a free copy of a study guide that summarizes the key lessons learned from this story and offers actionable steps that leaders can take in their communities. The guide and other related resources are available at schoolconversations.org/Reading and at theharwoodinstitute.org/Reading. Rich, welcome back. I'd like you to jump right in and talk about what emerged from your work in Reading, starting with efforts around after and out of school activities. What were some of the problems that really needed attention?
Well, first, I think, in the community, there was a youth violence crisis. Kids weren't showing up to classes. It's not that the community didn't have after-school programs. What they found by listening to kids was those after-school programs weren't aligned with what really mattered to kids. They weren't aligned with what really mattered to families. One example is when they talked to kids, the kids were saying, look, we don't need only one-to-one mentoring programs. We want to do things with other kids in safe spaces that might be supervised. So Mike Toledo, who's head of the Hispanic Center in Reading, became the team lead for this team. And, as Mike and I would talk about all the time, it's not that Reading didn't have programs, it's that people weren't working together. They were too fragmented. There was too much competition for resources and money. People were basically fighting with one another in some ways. And so they had to come together and recognize that they were going to need to work, not just get together, but work together in fundamentally different ways. And they began to do that, and they began to see progress. And one thing that they realized was, for years and years, the school district, for a variety of reasons, had said, well, you can't locate after-school programs in our buildings. And yet, when they talked to kids and parents, they all said one of the places we feel safe is in schools. And so out of this initiative came the effort of intergenerational after-school programs for youth and families together that were located in schools for the first time, I think, in 10, 20 years, almost a generation, which began to make a huge difference. But it meant different partners were going to have to come together in the community and work together differently. It meant that those partners were going to have to work with the school district differently. It meant that they were going to have to work with kids and families differently. That's a radically different approach than what they had been taking for years.
My name is Michael Toledo. I am currently the president and CEO of Centro, Hispano, a nonprofit organization in our community that's been serving the greater Reading community for the last 50 years. One of the takeaways from our work with the Harwood was the fact that the community shared with us that what was important was after-school programming, creating safe spaces and safe places for the children to be able to find enrichment, to be able to find resources and support to complement the education they were receiving in the schools. At the time, there were locations where youth could go, but they were not known. It was fragmented in terms of what after school programming was available. The community shared that they wanted to see more collaboration between organizations that were providing after school programming. And they wanted the school district to engage with community partners so that the children that were going to these programs were able to find, again, safe avenues for them to be able to participate in after school programming. And we were able to, again, working together with the school district, working together with Rich and his team, we created this cohort of 25 different organizations. There were not programs there to meet the needs of youth the way that they are now.
Laura Cordero, a colleague of Michael Toledo at Centro Hispano, said, we have to ask and really honor what matters to our community. And she was directly involved in inviting youth in the school district to come forward and say, what really matters to you? And one of the things that emerged through those conversations is that at the end of the day, many of us are hungry. And the school system said, we don't have funding. We can't feed you at the end of the day. But then because they were now connecting with other people in the community, Centro Hispano and other resources in the community stepped up and say, we can solve that problem.
Hi, my name is Laura Cordero. I work at Centro Hispano here in Reading, Pennsylvania, and my role is the Director of Community Impact. After school activities and programs serve so many important purposes for youth's development and even investment in success in the classroom. It's helping to expose them to different ideas, and especially these after school and out of school time opportunities are connecting young people to a loving and caring adult, which is one of the most critical indicators for a child's success in their life. Yes, in their academics, but also through helping them navigate decisions for their life. And in Reading, we see this a lot. I mean, through our community conversations, that when the after school and out of school time team got together, the first thing that we did was held a series of community conversations with students, with parent groups, with teachers. We held at least maybe 15 to 18 of these community conversations within that first year or 9 months working together. And I remember I sat in on several of the conversations with our middle school students, and they're looking for more. They said, we just want experiences. We want field trips. Some of these students are experiencing food insecurity at home. They're not, they don't have access to consistent meals. And so at their after school program, they're getting fed, they're getting meals. And this led to one partner, like a partnership that came through this network and initiative. Our communities in schools here is very active in our community. And Centro Hispano, we cook 3,000 hot meals a day, and we deliver Meals on Wheels in our local pre-K counts. And through a partnership with CIS, we were offering meals after school to several of the schools that are connected with CIS. But through that, we saw CIS was telling us, the schools that we are serving meals and in their after school programs, our participation in after school is increasing after we started serving meals. So then we're looking at, oh, that's interesting. That's like a doubly great thing. Where else can we do this? So we're going to our Harwood partners in the ASA group and asking, anybody who's running an after school program, do you need meals? So then we're seeing other partners that we can deliver meals to include in their already, pre-programmed after school program to see their numbers increase, participation increase. So a little extra incentive for students to come after school, get a meal, and also have a space that they can have, engagement with their peers in a positive way, which is also a huge benefit of our after school programs.
Laura's example is one where a couple of things were present that are important. One is they listened deeply to youth. and you told them something that is so basic in each of our lives. We're all hungry. We need to be fed. We can't learn. We can't function without nutrition. So that's one thing. But here's the challenge in so many communities. We don't learn that because we didn't stop to really listen. We assume we know what the problem is. But even if we stop to listen, we don't act on it. And at the core of the Reading story is both the newly developed habit of listening deeply in very particular ways and of learning to understand what people are really trying to tell you. And the other part, or one other part, is that they decided to build together. Centro, Hispano, and other groups came together and decided we can solve this problem. But that required taking action. It required taking action together. There was no one group that could solve it on their own. And it required sustained action over time. In doing that, they were both making down payments that we're actually hearing people, we're actually seeing them, we actually value them. And they were making down payments that we're going to get on a different trajectory in this community by taking action together and demonstrating that we can actually get stuff done together.
One of the initiatives that emerged in this work was after school programs, but I want to have you talk a little bit about another one that emerged and tell the story about how that happened and what difference it made. And that's a task force that was formed to talk. They would focus on many of the residents that were either limited English speakers or non-English speakers. Why did that emerge as a challenge? And then what did the task force do and what difference has it made?
First, I think what they realized by listening was that English as a second language was an issue of people's ability to fully participate in the life of the community and the life of their families. And that it cut to the very core of what does it mean to have dignity? What does it mean to be able to have a sense of agency and shape your own future? What does it mean to be able to talk to your kid or your kid's teacher? And what does it mean to hold a job? And what they found out, among other things, was that the programs being provided weren't meeting people where they were, that the programs they were providing were too fragmented, that the programs they were providing culturally didn't speak to people. And then they found out that people who were learning English were afraid to practice it. They had no one to practice it with. And if you've ever learned a new language, it's very daunting to speak it if you don't feel confident. The only way to feel confident is to practice it. And then the other thing was people were afraid to engage in these programs because there was a violence problem in Reading and they were afraid to go out. So one of the members of the English as a second language team, this is one small action that they took, but it triggered a whole chain reaction, was a guy named Pastor Steve, a pastor of a local church. He heard these things. And he said, so people are afraid to practice English. They're afraid to come out of their homes. They don't feel like they have enough support. We're not meeting them where they are. Well, heck, why don't I start dinners in my church? It's the Latino community. Food is an important part of the culture. Let's start a dinner where people who are learning English can practice English. But not only that, people who speak English can practice with them so they can learn Spanish.
My name is Steve Onsman. I'm the pastor of Calvary United Church of Christ in the city of Reading. It's actually one of the easiest outreaches our church has done ever, because all we do is cook dinner, and we've been getting 50 to 75 people at each one of them. And we get about 6 or 7 volunteers who will sit at the tables. And I just welcome everybody in Spanish. And for about an hour and a half, we just talk. It's become a community organization in itself. And it's also brought some of our congregations closer together because we've been able to do some work with each other that in the past we never were able to do.
But the story didn't end there on the practice dinners. Other pastors heard about this and they said, well, we can do this. So Pastor Steve created a little kit to show them how to do it. And he trained them in the kit and they started to do it. And then civic organizations heard it and they started to do it. Then employers started to hear it. And they said, well, we're not going to do a dinner, but we could do something in our place of employment. Can you help us do that? So they started to do it. And on and on and on, this effort went. 2 years forward, they triggered the community college. They triggered the local school district. They triggered employers to rebuild a system around English as a second language to create transformational systemic change, not just programs, but systemic change. Last example. They all got together and said, instead of us competing with one another, we're going to create a way to integrate our efforts so that if someone shows up at your program and it's not exactly the right program, we're going to refer them to another program. And so they created a seamless web of support for people learning English that was focused on the individual, not their programs. That required these programs to not simply get together and talk about how great their programs were or to compete for new dollars individually, but to actually come together, work together differently, support one another, and put the focus on people, not their programs.
One of the things that is important about the story you just shared is the important role that faith leaders can play in a community. And one of the stories I heard from Pastor Steve was how they decided to adopt an elementary school in the district. And so their first impulse was to go out and say, we're going to offer this support to you. And then they realized there's a much better way to do this, is let's ask them what they need. Is there anything we can provide?
I have a number of my church members who tutor for reading in the schools. And that is a program that came out of the United Way, which is called Ready, Set, Read. And that was before the Harwood experience, but it's also kind of connected to doing some of the same things. So as a ripple effect of that, my church adopted the closest elementary school. The adopting of the school to me has been a really important part because for the first time, the folks who work at this particular school tell me they know we're there. We're just down the street from them, but now they know we're there and that we're there to help them. I think the most important thing for faith communities is to go to the leadership and ask what they need. I mean, that's the simplest question, right? I'll just contact the principal and I'll say, okay, now what do the kids need? What do the teachers need? 2 years ago, I think it was, he said, for some reason, we have a lot of kids coming to school without jackets and it's winter and we need. So I just put a call out to our congregation and a bunch of other congregations and said, here's what they need. Here are the sizes, whatever you can do. Or if you want to give money, we'll buy some. And then 60 jackets showed up. And I brought them up to the school. They put them in a closet. And when a kid came in, they said, come here, and they got them to pick one. That's, I think, one of the best ways our congregations can work together to help schools.
In so many communities that I work with, faith leaders are in arguments about their doctrines and beliefs and their teachings and ostensibly trying to put people in pews on Wednesday night and Sunday mornings. And what Pastor Steve is a great example of is holding true to your beliefs and doctrines, your faith, while serving a civic purpose. That those two things do not need to be mutually exclusive, that those two things do not need to be in competition, that to serve a civic purpose does not mean that you have to give up your religious beliefs. It means that you have to have the courage and the humility to both hold true to your beliefs and to turn outward toward the community, listen deeply, and figure out how you can serve a larger civic purpose while putting your faith in action. And Pastor Steve is one of the best exemplars that I know right now.
Rich, I want to just have you talk a little bit about the third initiative that emerged in this work, which was support for early childhood education. Talk a bit about how that happened and why that emerged as an aspiration for the community, and then who came together and what did they do?
So the United Way there had received $10 million from Mackenzie Scott. They had been working on early childhood. They and others in the community believed that they knew what needed to be done here, which was to work on the supply side of the equation, meaning get more teachers, get more certified places, and those types of things. Partially true. But so much of the effort had been focused on that. And when they began to listen, years of efforts, when they began to listen deeply to the community, what they found out was that people, again, didn't necessarily trust those programs, that people who were teaching them didn't necessarily speak their language, that they weren't culturally sensitive, that they didn't have transportation to these places. but most importantly, that they didn't value early childhood education. But here's the moral of this story. The group that formed around early childhood education could have kept going on the strategy that they came in with, and they would have produced some good things. But because they listened, they realized that, in the words of Tammy White, the CEO of the local United Way, and Ashley Chambers, Tammy's right-hand person, in Tammy's words, they needed to make a U-turn.
I'm Ashley Chambers. I am the Senior Vice President of Community Impact with the United Way of Berks County. With the United Way's early childhood education work, we were coming at it from a lens of what we had been doing through our Ready, Set, Read initiative. We were focused on increasing the quality of childcare centers in the city. And so that was our focus going in and bringing in some of our usual partners to say, okay, how can we continue to get more childcare centers to be high quality in the city? And so we did community conversations. We talked with a number of folks living here, but we weren't hearing the same things that we were saying at our meetings. We were hearing people I want to know my neighbors. I want to feel safe in this community. When we specifically talked about early childhood education, we got the sense that those that we were speaking to didn't necessarily think that we needed more childcare. And so we started having some more conversations, and we realized that it was the demand, not necessarily the supply, that we needed to focus on. We needed to focus on raising awareness that the 0 to 5 ages were highly critical to the future success of children. And so it was almost an aha moment at one of our meetings that, wait, we've been missing something. So we completely shifted our focus. We needed to do something different because the same thing hadn't been working. We need to go back out and really look at what people are saying. As nonprofits working in the community, we all typically have our own agenda, our own focus of what services we're providing. And so when we started coming together through the Harwood work, we realized that many of us had been siloed and, just staying in our lane, doing our own thing. And that really began to open our eyes that we can do different things working together, because we don't need to recreate the wheel. We don't need to continue investing resources if another organization is already doing it.
I don't know very many leaders that would make a public U-turn like that, and it was public, who had a board, who had this money from Mackenzie Scott, who had a special task force within the United Way in early childhood education that had been working for years. That was really a courageous act, and it was fused with an incredible amount of humility, and it produced fundamentally different results for the community moving forward.
So, Richard, I want you to just talk a little bit about where things are now in Reading, and what do you see that's different, fundamentally different now in Reading versus what you saw when you went there in 2020, 2021?
When we first started working with folks in Reading, the community was highly fragmented. It was siloed. Leaders didn't want to work together. There weren't a lot of leaders that people could say they trusted. Organizations were competing over dollars. There was not a culture of engaging people about what matters to them. And when they did engage people, it was mostly people talking at residents, not talking with residents. When they did listen, they didn't act on what they heard. There were norms of finger pointing and people placing blame for what went wrong in the community. People felt as though whole swaths of the community had been left out and left behind. Fast forward 3 years. What people tell us is that they're creating an entirely different civic culture, that different organizations like early childhood groups, like English as a second language groups, like after-school activity groups have now come together. They're not only getting together, they're working together. That there has been created an entirely new cadre of leaders, both leaders who are official, who have titles, who head up organizations, but also lots of folks who are embedded in the community that people now trust as leaders, like Pastor Steve. And so there's a new cadre of leaders leading the charge. There is now a new culture of listening deeply and focusing on people's shared aspirations, not problems, not utopian visions, but where people want to go and what they're for. There is now a new culture of responding to what matters to people and demonstrating through down payments that we're actually listening and we're actually taking action and moving forward together.
We talked about early childhood education, we talked about after school programming, and we talked about English as a second language and the importance of that. And those groups have done some fairly significant things and brought people together trying to resolve some of those issues. But the Harwood mindset, the whole dialogue that was created here has also created some other groups that are doing somewhat similar sorts of things, really sort of leaning on the Harwood model. So there's a group that's been working on violence and youth violence in the community, disaffected youth, literacy and those kinds of questions that are not just the students' literacy, but the parents' and grandparents' literacy. So it's had an impact, it's had a ripple effect, to use a word, a ripple effect across the community in pretty significant ways. My name is Dave Myers. I had been the executive director of the Berks Alliance.
When I asked people not long ago, what are you creating here? As much as they wanted to tell me about the strategies, programs, and initiatives they created in these 3 different areas, what they said to me was, Rich, we're creating a new way of working. We're creating new norms in our community. We're creating new leaders in our community. We've created organizations that are actually turned outward toward one another and are working together. We're creating a new way to talk to one another and actually listen to one another and take action on what we've collectively heard. They said to me that we are creating a new sense of pride in a community that had lost pride, that we're creating a new sense of hope in a community that had lost hope, that we're creating a new positive can-do narrative in a community, that the narrative was once you should flee here as fast as you possibly can, and now the narrative is this is a place you should move to and stay in and raise your kids. That's a radically different set of notions in just 3 short years.
I think I see an increase in hope in those who are engaged. And every time we talk to someone and let them know what we've learned, you do see a sparkle of hope. Are we perfect? No. And we are transparent about that. We know we still have work to do. You know, we can't hide that. We know what work needs to get done. But seeing folks who have seen our work want to get involved is sign enough for me to say that they're hopeful for our future. I'm Dalia Garcia with Communities and Schools of Eastern Pennsylvania.
My name is Karen Reitmeyer, Chief Strategy Officer of the Why Missing Foundation. Through Harwood, we will sustain our efforts even though now they are not actively involved in the community. They've graduated us, if you will, and they still support us, but not to the level that they did before. So, you know, the idea is that we support ourselves, and I think so far we're doing a good job of it.
When the community knows that they matter and that their voice matters, there's nothing that we can't accomplish together.
Now, the really important question. I think, Rich, there are people listening to this that say, I work and live in a community. It's not like Reading. The demographics are different. The challenges are different, but our civic culture is not where it should be. And we are operating in silos. We need a mindset where we turn outward and can strengthen our school system. Maybe it's not a school system in great need and dysfunctional, but we could go from good to great. What do you suggest we do in our community to achieve some of the same kinds of things that have been achieved in Reading?
So first, I think if your community is like Reading and want to create large-scale transformational change, you can always work with the Institute in an initiative like that. If you want to learn some of the ways in which we work with people and the training that we actually took people through in Reading, you can go to our school and go to our website. If tomorrow you just want to get started. We have 4 mantras that I would say that you want to keep in mind. Number 1, turn outward toward your community. Make your community and people there the reference point for everything that you do, and make sure that you have a deep understanding of what matters to people. This could be in your neighborhood with your local elementary school or middle school or your neighborhood association. But you got to be turned outward. You got to engage people around their shared aspirations. That's number 1. Number 2, you've got to get in motion. The only way in which we're going to create change in our communities is not simply by talking with one another, as important as that is as a starting point, but we actually have to do things. And so what I would say is get in motion and start building with others. You don't need hundreds of people. You don't even need scores of people. You don't even need 15 people. You just need a handful just to get moving. Third, start small to go big. Look, I want big systemic change like we created in Reading, but it all started in small ways. So release yourself from the burden that you have to create big comprehensive change overnight and just focus on one small thing that you can get moving on and use that as a way to catalyze a larger, ever-growing chain reaction of efforts over time. And then lastly, keep in mind, the fourth one is keep in mind that you want to create a new trajectory of hope. I think hope is at the core of this. We all want to hope, and we've all lost hope, or at least many of us have. And the question becomes, what engenders hope? What engenders hope is not declaring that you have the answer. It's not raising all the money that you need. It's not creating the most complex solution. It's just demonstrating over time that we're moving in a better direction that's producing better results with increasing momentum and where people are gaining civic confidence. So again, release yourself from having to do everything at once and just try to create an upward sloping curve called the trajectory of hope that's saying to people, hey, we can do this. We can restore our sense of belief in ourselves and one another. We can actually come together and get things done just by taking one step at a time.
Rich, I want to thank you so much for being part of Courageous Conversations about our schools and sharing the work of the Harvard Institute in Reading, Pennsylvania. I also want to thank all of the school and community leaders in Reading for helping us produce this story. You can find this and all of our episodes wherever you stream your podcasts. You can also find this episode notes, and a free study guide for this series at schoolconversations.org/Reading and at the harvardinstitute.org/Reading. Bye, everyone.